Hey, let's talk about sway bars. I've been meaning to take the sway bar off of this thing and just to kind of see if I can get a little more articulation out of it. Just as kind of an experiment. I'd mentioned it in my walk around video that I wanted to try it, but I kind of wanted to approach it scientifically, I guess you could say, but kind of redneck scientific. I'm going to run a couple of tests and with the sway bar on, and then show you how to take the sway bar off, and then do the same test again and see if we can just see some measurable results from with it on and with it off. Something kind of visual and something we can actually measure to see the actual difference that we get. If you're not familiar with, if you don't really know what the sway bar does, the basic idea, so, front and rear, most machines nowadays have independent suspension, which means in theory that this tire can go up and down separate from this tire in the back. All four tires are independently suspended and can kind of articulate and do their own thing. What a sway bar does is it runs from the suspension arm of one side of the vehicle, goes over and it bolts in two places on the vehicle itself, comes out and attaches to the other side in the same way. So what it really does is it makes your independent suspension dependent now, because it's tied to the other side. Now the bar is designed to have some twist in it, so this side can come up a little bit independent of this side, but they are tied together and tied in the middle of the machine. Now what that does is it kind of holds the body roll to a minimum. It makes it so that when you turn a corner, the whole machine doesn't lean like this when you're turning this way and lean like this when you're turning this way. It keeps the body flat. In theory, that's what they're supposed to do. So there's a balance between making the machine stable when you're going fast so that you don't feel like you're going to tip over. There's a balance between that and allowing the wheels to articulate separately. And Can-Am's done a pretty good job, found a pretty good balance. It went a little towards the stability side because it is super stable at high speeds. It seems like they've kind of slanted that way just a little bit, in my opinion. Anyway, so if you're really not familiar with what the sway bar does, I absolutely don't recommend you take it off. So here's my disclaimer: don't take it off. Don't do it. I don't want anybody trying to tell me that this was my idea. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna take it off, and I'm gonna show you the difference with it on and with it off. And that's all this information. It's informational video. That's all this is. My disclaimer is: don't take it off. Don't even look at it. Don't touch it. Don't do anything with it. Especially if you're just not certain of what the function of it is, just leave it alone. This is informational. I'm going to show you before and after. So first thing we'll do is try and run a couple of tests with it on, and then I'll go through, try to take it off. It looks like it'll be fairly simple. We'll start in the front. And then kind of run those same tests again with it off and just see what we come up with. Let's get started. Okay, so first what I've done, I've got the floor jack underneath the left front tire. I'm just going to jack it up until another tire leaves the ground, whether it be that one or that one back there. Once I see air underneath another tire, then I'll stop and just measure how far the pad of the jack is from the floor. Kind of use that as a reference point to start with. Go from there. Okay, so got the wheel jacked up. I'm right at the point where this tire is just barely off of the floor. It's just lightly rubbing the floor. And kind of what's also interesting is the same thing is true back here in this back tire, it's just, I feel the tread rubbing the floor. So that tire is barely on the ground, and that tire is barely on the ground. So the majority of the weight of the vehicle is on this tire and that tire back there. I don't know, that's kind of interesting. I thought at least one tire would be more on the ground than the other here, but nope, they are both just barely touching. All right, so this is a little tricky to do, holding the camera, but there you can see, I don't know, from the top of that ridge, or bottom of that ridge even, it's just, I don't know what, 8 3/8 maybe, 8 7/16. I mean, we can call it 8 1/2 if you want, but it's somewhere in there. Anyway, okay, so that's experiment 1. We'll kind of keep that as a reference point. Try something else. So next thing I tried was this, just an automotive style ramp. I drove up to the top just because I couldn't tell from sitting inside where the suspension was. So I just kind of drove up to the top of it. And again, you can see this front tire is just grazing the ground. I mean, barely, but it's essentially off the ground. This one is, very much on the ground. And this one here is similar story as when it was on the floor jack. I can feel the tread scrubbing the ground, but it's just barely touching the ground. Sitting on top of that. I would roll back down and try to park it on the ramp itself, just to kind of get a reference point on the ramp, how high I can get when the tires are still on the ground, but everything kind of slides across the floor when I do that. So we'll just have to do it this way. It's on the ramp, and that tire is barely touching the ground, and that tire is barely touching the ground. We'll have to call that another reference point for the experiment. So just for reference on this ramp, it's about 8 inches from the bottom of that little D10 at the top. It's about 8 inches off the ground. So about the same story as we had with the floor jack. Pretty close. Anyway, just for reference. Okay, so what I did here, I just kind of drove off the edge of my driveway down here into the gravel. Pretty basic obstacle that you're going to find on any trail. Pretty simple, but again, it's pretty symbolic of any bump or anything else you're going to see on the trail. So this tire is touching the ground barely. You can see I can turn it a little bit in the gravel. That tire there is firmly on the ground. This one here is also firmly on the ground. This back tire back here is it's barely touching. I can slide it a little bit on the concrete, but it is just barely touching. So again, that tire and that tire up there are carrying pretty much all the weight here. And I say that's not a big dip. Again, I say that's pretty representative of any basic bump obstacle you're going to see out on the trail. Anyway, so another little reference point we can work with. So back in the garage, you can hear the engine tinking. It's just cooling down. So kind of give you some idea then of what we're dealing with. It's like I say, it gives you a ton of stability. It is really super great in the corners and the high speed turns, but boy, this thing is almost just a flat plane of wood almost. It's pretty stiff. The front suspension on the Maverick trail is quite a bit softer, in my opinion, just from what I can feel. It's quite a bit softer than the rear. The rear is a lot stiffer. And you can see in my previous videos, but anyway, here you can see the rear sway bar is pretty big. I mean, probably an inch, I don't know. I think the biggest culprit as far as articulation in this thing is the rear. I think the rear is so massively stiff, but I don't think I want to take the rear one off. I think because this is where all the weight is. I don't know. I'm gonna start on the front. We'll see what the front does. I'll run it for a while, see if I need to do anything else, but I'm gonna leave the rear alone. Like I say, I'd probably get a little more of what I'm looking for if I undo the rear, but I'm afraid it'll affect, you know, the high speed stability more if I take that back one off. So we will start with the front. So what I'm going to do, and I can't really do this holding the camera, but I'm going to jack the machine up, take all the weight off the front suspension. The sway bar mounts to the A-arm here. From this link, it mounts here. Same on the other side. It's identical. So I'll have to undo this bolt on this side and that same bolt on the other side. And the sway bar, if I can even get it to show up on camera, bolts to the machine here and here, and it's identical on the other side. So I'll undo these 4 bolts holding it onto the machine itself, undo the 2 bolts holding it to the A-arms. It looks like I might have to take the bolt out of the shock, swing it out of the way so I can pull the whole arm and just get it out this side, put the shock back on and set it back down. So that's the plan. So one thing that's been brought up about the axle binding with this much articulation, and then here's this tire's off the ground. I've got it just jacked up from the belly. So this side is at full droop, and I don't feel any binding. So yeah, I don't think that's a worry at all. So just another concern somebody had that thought we'd address, but I don't think we're going to have this problem at all. So yeah, again, at full droop, everything feels good. So, passenger side's off. Gonna work over here to the driver's side. I took the shock off just so I can get a little more room to pull that out. I took the tire off just to give me a little more room to get everything out. Worth mentioning, so these are 18 millimeter, I think. Yeah, 18 millimeter bolts, same up here, 18 millimeter. Worth pointing out though, there's a nut on the bottom side of each of these bolts up here, and there is a nut on the back side of that bolt too. So I didn't know that, but now I do. All right, so there it is. It's out of the machine. To make it a little easier for you guys when you don't ever take this out, because you should never take this out, undo the end link instead of just leaving it from the suspension arm itself. Undo it from here. That way you're not trying to feed all of that out. It just makes it a little easier. But there it is. Just leaving the bolts and nuts with it. So if I ever want to, when I put it back on to be safe. But it gives you a better idea of how it works. So these 2 points are bolted to the machine. Those points are bolted to the suspension. And so you can kind of see, you know, both tires and wheels will go up on each side. They'll both go up like this just fine. But because they're tied together, this kind of keeps this from happening. Like I say, there's some twists designed in this bar to allow some of that. But for the most part, it ties the 2 points together so that when you're turning, this arm can't do this. And anyway, it keeps everything stable. But that kind of gives you a visualization of how it works. Imagine a wheel here and a wheel here. Like I say, they can do this just fine. This ties it so it doesn't do this. Anyway, it's out. So we'll put the machine back together. Okay, so we're back together. Tires back on, shocks bolted back in, back on the jack. Gonna do the same thing we did in the first one. I'm just gonna crank it up until I get another tire off the ground. Give it a measure, we see what happens. Okay, it's jacked back up. About in the same situation I was the first time I did this. This tire is is touching the ground, but just barely. When I turn it, it turns, it's just barely touching the ground. This front tire over here, same thing, it's touching the ground, but just very lightly. I can still kind of scrub it across the floor, but it is touching. So about the same position as we were in last time. So grab my handy dandy tape measure with my other available hand. And we were 8 3/8-ish, 8 7/16 to the bottom of that pad. And I mean, you can see we're at almost 13 inches, just shy of 13 inches, but pretty damn close. Even more, 13 1/4. So yeah, I don't know, I can't do the math that fast, but damn near 5 inches of wheel travel that we gained by taking that sway bar off, which you shouldn't do because it's not safe. But yeah, so you can see, boy, it's sure scrunching that tire, I think, a little more than it used to, because it's able to put a little more weight on this tire instead of transferring it over there. But anyway, so that tire, I don't know. But anyway, the measurement was from the pad. So I'd say that was a complete success. So doing this experiment again, only just because we did one already. I mean, this would be a lot more interesting if this ramp was really long and we could see how far up the ramp we got the first time and how far up the ramp we got the second time, but we don't have the ability to do that. But anyways, you maybe remember the results of this were pretty similar to being up on the jack with the sway bar on. This tire was off the ground. It is totally not. Firmly planted on the ground. This tire here, firmly planted on the ground. So just to sort of duplicate the same kind of non-convincing test, but yeah, that little 8 inches of ramp got it up to where that tire was barely touching the ground and that tire was barely touching the ground, and now it's like no effect at all. You can see that tire is totally able to come up and flex separate from that side. I mean, that's what I'm after right there. So same story out here. Dropped it down in this little droop. This tire's nice and solid on the ground, as well as this one. This one here is solid on the ground. Everything. I mean, this one was the one was the most disappointing to me when it was stock. Was so that ain't much of a drop. Like I said, it's pretty representative of any basic obstacle you're going to find on a trail, and even this little thing made it a little bit uneasy. But you can see now it's got one tire drooped, and the machine is still solid, not tippy. So yeah, this one is, like I say, there's no facts and figures and charts to prove this one, but just having all 4 tires still firmly planted on the ground on a dumb little obstacle like that is that's what I was looking for. So just looking for some mounds of dirt. All tires still on the ground. So kind of my first impressions, driving along, it used to be you'd feel, when you come up to a bump, you'd feel the front end bump and then you'd feel the back end bump. Now you don't even feel the front end hit it. All you feel is the back end go over it. Just first little thing I noticed. So one thing that was brought up and asked, you know, is if it'll make the machine feel a little bit more tippy. I think it's kind of just the opposite. To me, it makes it feel less tippy because I feel like I have all 4 tires on the ground all the time. It's even going up kind of up that hill on a side wheel a little bit and coming down it. It actually feels less tippy because the front tires are making contact with the ground all the time. So that's kind of a benefit. Like I said, I'm just kind of putting around here slow. So getting the feel for the articulation and that kind of thing. But it feels really good. They say first impressions, it just feels really good. Yeah, I'm impressed. This is what I was looking for. So up to speed, you definitely feel it. I hope you can hear this, but I'm only doing, 13, 14 miles an hour, but you can feel that front end, that front outside corner. You can feel it dive. It's not bad. You can definitely feel it. Of course, it's going to be multiplied the faster you go. So, I mean, that's the drawback. That's the trade-off, is you lose a little bit of your high-speed stability. The back end obviously is solid as a rock. It's not moving, but it's just that front end that you can feel the body roll just a little bit. So I think that'll take some getting used to, but you know what? It's manageable and it's predictable. So I don't really think that's a drawback at all. And I don't usually drive this thing too fast. 30, 35 is about my max. I've never been too concerned with the high-speed stability, so it's not much of a drawback for me. But that is the part that you got to be aware of. So, but again, to me, it's predictable. To me, it's acceptable. There is absolutely, definitely some front end body roll with those high-speed turns. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because as you transfer and all the body rolls that way, it's putting weight on that outside tire, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing. You don't want too much coming up off the inside tire, obviously. Okay, so I guess just some of my final thoughts. Let's see if I can find some mud. It was clean. Again, I have to say, if you don't know what the sway bar does, if you're not really familiar with the side effects, just leave it alone. Don't take it off because I told you to. In fact, I'm telling you not to take it off. If you know what the sway bar does, then I can tell you the results are exactly what you think they're going to be. You take that front sway bar off, and you really improve your articulation in the front end, and it affects the whole bike. Allowing one wheel to come up without taking weight off two other wheels, it really affects the stability of the whole bike when you're going slow. Yeah, having that extra articulation is what I need for where I ride. Like I say, I don't go fast. I don't spend a lot of time going. I mean, if I was traveling down a dirt road at 35, 40 miles an hour and a deer jumped out in front of me and I had to wail on the wheel, I don't know what's going to happen. Front end was going to sway over to the side. I don't know. So let's hope that doesn't come up, because the opposite effect that it has, which is predictable, is you lose that stability in the front end. The back end is still square. It's still planted. It doesn't roll at all. The front end, you can see in the video, the front end dives. When you turn to the left, the front end dives like that pretty heavily. Turn right, the front end dives like that as you're going that way, which is what the sway bar is for, is to keep that from happening. So you remove the sway bar, you get predictable results. I expected that to happen, and like I said, it's predictable and it's manageable. I don't mind it. It's going to take some getting used to, but for me, that's a non-issue, because hopefully I'm not going to be going 40 miles an hour down a dirt road and a deer jumps out in front of me. I'll just have to hit the deer, I suppose. So that's my thoughts. For me, it's exactly the results I was looking for. I gained, what was it, almost 5 inches of independent wheel travel in that front end. Again, it was asked, if I thought it would be a little more tippy on a side hill. To me, now this is on a partial side hill where I'm angling up something like this. Now on a full side hill, I don't know yet, haven't found one, but going up a side hill, it's less tippy. because this front end is able to come up without taking weight off of these two. So in that respect, it's less tippy. When the whole machine's on an equal side hill, I couldn't find one big enough to hold me, so we'll have to see how that goes. It's a 50-inch machine. It's going to feel tippy anyway. So I don't know. But that's my thoughts. I just kind of wanted to share. That's, again, like I said, that's exactly what I thought was going to happen. That was exactly what I hoped was going to happen. And these are the results you would expect too if you took yours off, which you shouldn't do. Anyway, put some more miles on it, report back on it later. So far, that's what I wanted. Thanks for watching, you guys.